basically, perfusion is nothing but study of blood flow, right? So every tissue in our human body, every cell works based on how the blood is supplied to it. It needs energy to function, and the nutrition that cell needs is provided through blood, right? So understanding the blood flow into a tissue or cell is crucial in diagnosing or estimating the functionality. So all perfusion studies are functional studies because you're trying to understand how the cell or tissue is functioning. So depending on the modality, and we know that blood vessels can range anywhere from almost 1 inch diameter or little less than 1 inch diameter to less than a millimeter in diameter, right? So they keep, as you see in the picture, so they keep bifurcating and form into capillaries, and a complex network of capillaries feed the tissues and cells in the human body. One thing that we have to know is that these blood vessels are more or like a life in themselves. So the blood vessel structure that we have at the microcapillary level are not fixed. So they keep generating, they keep taking new paths, they keep evolving. And one of the side impact is, for example, when we start developing cancerous tissues, and cancerous tissues takes advantage of this, it's called angiogenesis, the ability to generate new blood vessels and structure. Cancer tissues are very greedy. They are very greedy. So they try to consume most of the blood, most of the nutrition to grow faster than normal healthy tissue. So they try to increase the network to their area. So a cancerous tissue is well defined. It's very classic that all cancerous tissues will have a very dense capillary network, and all cancerous tissue absorb more blood than a normal tissue would. Not only absorb, they'll also retain blood for longer duration. They'll keep the blood with themselves for a longer duration. So we know this. It's a biochemical nature of the tissues, right? And now we take advantage of this knowledge in trying to image that. So perfusion kinetics is a very classic and basic method that is used in identifying the blood flow. Very as basic as blood flow can determine the nature of the tissue, if it is cancerous, how far the cancer has grown, and when we start treating, what is the response to the treatment of the cancer. So the technique is very simple. So we inject contrast agent. Like I said, blood vessels are not easy to visualize in CT. Even in MR, MR has capability to look at blood because blood has hydrogen, right? But when you want to distinguish only blood from any other tissue, sometimes we use contrast agent even in MR. To give a rough idea, more than 70 to 75% of CT examinations use contrast agents, right? Only 20 or 30% of the CT examinations are done without injecting contrast. Typically, when you want to see the blood vessels. Whereas in MR, about 5 to 10% of examinations use contrast agent, and 90% of examinations do not need contrast agent. So that's why MR and ultrasound are the most safe modalities to be used. But like I said, the disadvantage of MR is the equipment is very expensive and takes time to perform the examination. So a patient can go any number of undergo any number of MR examinations without any side effects. Whereas we have to limit the number of CT or X-ray exposures in a given duration for a patient. So it's not suggested to go multiple number of CTs in a short duration. of course, there are developments in the dosage. When I say dosage, the amount of X-ray we use to generate images. There's a tremendous improvement in the last 5 to 10 years. We have, as I remember, I've been working for 20 years. The dosage has come down by more than 80% in the last 10 to 15 years. So the amount of X-ray we use to generate CT images has come down by 80%. And there is more and more research to reduce it even further. Okay, coming back to perfusion kinetics. So we inject the contrast agent, and as you know, blood takes time to flow. So if you inject somewhere in the thigh or in the arm, and if you're trying to image brain, so it takes a couple of seconds for the contrast agent to reach the brain. It has to go to heart first, then the heart pumps the blood to the brain. So what we do is, after injecting the contrast agent, for this simple example, let's assume that we are only imaging one cross section, one plane in the head, just one plane, right? Now you take the image at a regular interval. It's a temporal, right? You're taking a time-lapsed scan. So you keep scanning at that location, say every 2 seconds. And in MR, these contrast agents typically reduces the MR signal. So we have different properties. Like I said, MR is more versatile. You can even make the signal go up or make the signal come down. Right? This is a typical example where I'm showing is the signal goes down. So you can see on the time points, as the contrast agent reaches the particular location in the image, the signal drops. And when the blood is flushed out of the tissue, you see that the signal builds up again. Right? So imagine in this case, I've taken 40 images over a period of say 1 minute or 2 minutes. 1 minute is good enough for perfusion studies. You have 1 cycle of blood flow or 2 cycles of blood flow. Then you see the contrast going down and coming up. Information is very useful. So what we do with this is, for each location in the image, what you see here is a complete image, but in that image you have hundreds of pixels, right? And the curve that you see belongs to 1 pixel at a time. So if you take 1 pixel and draw a curve of the same pixel at different time points, right, you get a signal like this. And important characteristics is the time of arrival. How long does the contrast agent take to reach that area? How long does it take to reach the peak? And how long does it stay in the tissue? And we have a lot of mathematical models which will help us in computing the blood volume, the rate of blood flow, and the mean transit time of each tissues. So if you see, when you do this operation at every pixel and generate that map, quantitative map of the cross section, you see the results. On the right hand side, they are color coded purely to highlight the differences, right? So you see maps of blood volume, blood flow, and the latency of the blood and the initial time to arrival. If you look a little closely on the left hand side, the grayscale images, right? So these are anatomical, the structural images. To the naked eye, everything seems fine. And brain is symmetric in structure, right? Both the left hand side and right hand side of the brain is symmetric, and you see it's maintained very well, intact. And there's very little we can interpret of the problem in the anatomy of the image. If you see the left hand side images, everything looks fine. But if you see on the right hand side images, because brain is symmetric, the functionality is also expected to be symmetric in terms of perfusion. But you see a wide difference between the left and right hand side of the images. If you see the last image, for example, the right bottom, the right hand side is dark blue, very less function compared to the left hand side, which has a lot of yellowish green, right? And a symmetrical area, it's called a contralateral area, the same position both on left and right side. If you fold it in middle, right, imagine that you fold the brain into the middle. So both the positions should have similar functionality. And with this kind of quantitative analysis, it becomes very clear to us that there is something wrong in the tissue. And you can easily identify tumor tissues before you can even see them structurally, before they become more than 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters, right? You can see a tumor tissue when it grows into a size, significant size that becomes visible in the anatomical image, on the structural image on the left-hand side. So that's the power of the functional imaging. Functional tells you even before you see the structural changes. And a lot of image processing techniques are used in analyzing and quantifying. So now these images are quantified. What you see in these images is in pure units of the how much blood in terms of milliliters, the flow, and that gives a very good measure of the functionality of the tissue. And perfusion is very widely used, not just on MR images, it's also used on CT. And recently there are developments in trying to make perfusion analysis even from ultrasound images. So perfusion is, like I said, study of flow and consumption of blood. So this gives, though it's a very basic method, it gives very, very crucial information in diagnosing the disease, even before you can see structural changes. And when you see structural changes, there also it helps in grading the tumor. How bad, how fast is it growing? Has it stopped growing? Is there a potential for the tumor to grow and metastasis? Metastasis is occur in different places. Another beautiful example I have is in functional studies is fMRI. You must have seen it in some movies or read it in some papers. Basically, functional MRI tries to study the brain. Though I said structurally the brain is symmetric, structurally, but the responsibility of different regions of brain is different. You must also have heard that left brain people have some capabilities compared to right brain people, right? So logical thinking is on one side of the brain, creative thinking is on the left-hand side, artistic people have strength in some side. So that's a very high level of distinction, but indeed, different areas of brain control different functionalities. So your motor movement, when I say motor, muscle movements, when you move a hand, when you move a leg, entire brain is not used. There's only one small part in the brain that controls all the body movements in the body. And when you're seeing, right, when you're generating an image in your mind, there's again one small portion of the brain that controls vision. And similarly, one small portion of the brain that controls emotions. Small portion that controls your intelligence, your memory. So it's like if you take the whole brain and make it into multiple pieces, each piece is responsible for one definite function. And this was not known till fMRI came into picture. The functional MRI is a study of understanding how the brain functions and also try to treat people with disabilities. And we are also trying to understand human behavior with this. Why do some people behave in certain fashion? Why do some people get angry easily? Why do some people, a lot of studies being done on extreme people who are intelligent or who are, terrorists. Why do this help? This is a potential tool today. It's a non-invasive tool. You're not injecting, doing surgery, poking into human body. It's a potential tool in really understanding how the human brain works. So some very simple exercises are, for example, people who have paralysis, right? Who undergo paralysis, they lose certain functionality. Sometimes they cannot use left hand, they can only use right hand. Some people. So this helps in trying to identify how to provide treatment, targeting a particular region of the brain. So as simple, I will tell you how this examination is done and how MRI is used in understanding that. So basically, you will ask the patient to do the required tasks. For example, if you are examining the patient about his vision, so you show some pictures and you ask him to close eyes. So there are two tasks, right? One is rest, where he's not doing a task with that function, and another is a control task where he's doing something. And what we're trying to do is trying to keep looking at the brain through MR and see if there is a change in the activity in a particular region when he's performing the task. So you have an idle state, a rest state, and you have an active state. For example, if a person comes with saying that he is stammering suddenly, he can't speak fluently, then you are looking at the auditory part of the brain. So you will ask him to say some words. You ask him to keep quiet and then image, like that. Or if he has some problem in movement of his legs or hands, so you give him a task, move a leg, move a hand, and then, so you basically have two states. And this is an example of asking the patient to clench a ball. You give a ball and you ask him to clench the ball, you take image, and you ask him to just stop clenching, take rest, and you take image, right? And these two images produce a difference in the image. And you try to subtract that, and you see the highlight. You can see where the activity is, and then you map that activity to the brain structure, and you try to see how the brain is functioning. This is very simple to see it like this, but the examinations are very complex. Most of these exams take about 45 minutes. And the signal difference, because there's no contrast agent, right? And the signal difference is less than 2%. And being able to reliably detect the 2% difference in a noise that is more than 8%. A lot of our MR signals will have more than 8% of noise, and you have a signal difference that is associated to an activity which is 2%. You can imagine the amount of signal processing that is applied here to reliably distinguish this. So basically, similar to perfusion. So you take images when the person is performing the activity, and again, images when the person is not performing the activity. So you take at different time intervals. You see the red ones, red border ones are when it is in one condition, for example, doing the activity, and the green ones when it's not doing the activity. And when you draw a curve, you see the difference in the signal, which is a very small signal for us to detect. And based on this, we have various models where we try to fit and try to identify the active areas. And this is how we study the brain. It is attracting a lot of attention in studying the behavioral aspects of human beings. Next is another interesting application. This is again from MR. This is where we see the connections between different areas of the brain. Like I said, different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions. But as a human being, all these functions are coordinated. They have to go hand in hand. If you have to catch a ball, you have to first see it. So there's a vision part of the brain. Then you have to process it, the speed, the height, the position where the ball is going to come. So there's a logical part of the brain. And then you have to raise your hands, put it in the right position to catch. The muzzle, right? And all these are in different locations in the brain. And they have to communicate with each other. And this communication is typically done through neuron connections. And neuron connections are typically not individual, they go in bundles. Like the cables, the wires that run from one computer to another computer, right? If you see a big network of computers, you see a bundle of wires, network wires, power wires, going from one system to the other system. Or if you see a circuit, you see bus taking connections from one element to the other. It's very similar. So a lot of these neurons are bundled and they connect to different regions of the brain. the advantage that MR takes is that these bundles restrict the movement of water molecules within them. Measure here in MR is try to identify the movement of water molecules, not the signal from the water molecules, the amount, but we try to see how far a water molecule has moved. So imagine you have a bundle of a rope, like a rope, and if you pour some water into it, you know that the direction of the water flow is along the length of the rope, not perpendicular to it, right? So when you pour water, the water tries to spread on the rope in the direction along the rope, right? So water molecules are predominantly moving along the direction of the rope, predominantly. That's a similar principle that's used in these neuron fibers. So we detect a micromillimeter movement of water, micromillimeters, right? And from that directional information, we try to reconstruct the fiber connections that are generated that shows beautifully how different areas of the brain are connected. Right? You can see these are actually, I'm only showing one individual bundles of fibers. You imagine you have a capacity to see the function of an area. You also have a capability to see how that area is connected to a different area. So this gives us a powerful tool in really analyzing the brain and also diagnosing a lot of brain-related diseases. Alzheimer's, dementia, there are a lot of unknown diseases too. A lot of diseases that we still don't understand well. And these are the techniques that are helping us in really understanding what causes that, what's going wrong, and how can we treat, how can we cure. And when you're applying a treatment, is it really impacting the patient? So this is like looking into the brain as if you are looking into a circuitry. If you have a computer, if you have a motherboard, when you open it, you have ICs and you have connections. And we have various techniques to debug it, right? But for human being, we don't have that. And these are the techniques that help us in debugging the brain. And in cardiology, a lot of applications, and you hear it day in, day out. So these are CT images. I would like you to closely look at. So the white path that is going from top to the bottom. So that's a blood vessel supplying blood to the heart muscle. And somewhere in the middle, you see that the blood vessel is narrowed. It is not as thick as it is on the either ends, at the top and the bottom, right? So this is zoomed out image, and so this vessel is roughly 1 millimeter. I am assuming I don't have scale here. I'm going with the scale. So within a millimeter, we can detect the stenosis, the accumulation of cholesterol within the vessel. So the white part is the blood. You are not seeing the boundaries of the blood. You cannot see the boundaries of the blood vessel in CT. So the white part is purely because you have injected contrast agent. So the white is coming from the blood. You see the blood is narrowing somewhere in the middle. That means there's something obstructing it. So this is going to be a potential blocker. This needs a stent. This can lead to heart attack. If this is the main vessel, as you can see, it's coming from the main aorta. Right? So we have advanced techniques not only in detecting it, if you can also regenerate in 3D. If you see on the right hand side, you have beautifully regenerated, and you can see the blood vessel structure, and we can also quantify on how much has it accumulated in terms of volume, in terms of density. See on the right hand side in the right image, those green dots and yellow circles are basically trying to quantify the accumulation there within the blood vessel. And based on the density and the accumulation, you will choose whether you have to do a stent, whether it can go with medicines. So the approach is taken based on the analysis that is done here. And the simple, if you see on the, you see the blood vessel structure, right? So it's nicely visualized here. And there's a lot of segmentation that you can already appreciate. You can clearly see the distinction between the blood vessel and the cardiac muscle, right? And how do we segment? It's a very common thing that is used in medical analysis is something called active contours. So it's basically we draw a border. You can see that in this image there is a region of interest or a border drawn around an anatomy. So these are intelligent contours in the sense you can draw it any way you want. In the second image, if you draw with a mouse, for example, you cannot define the boundary very well. You can draw it roughly, and we have algorithms that can fit it nicely to the boundaries, like a rubber band. Right? When you apply a rubber band around an object, it doesn't matter how you apply it. Right? When you leave it, it nicely sticks to the boundaries. The exact properties are used in image processing. Active contours use energy minimization. It's an optimization problem. So you try to optimize. So for two forces. One is the gradient of the image, the difference between the signal intensities, and another is the length of the contour. So you try to optimize that, then you automatically fit the contour nicely around the boundaries. And you do that for every 2D image, then you can segment a volume, the entire boundary. A lot of segmentation tools use this. For example, in this case, it's a vascular structure, a blood vessel structure again, used in determining the stent planning. Before you apply a stent, you take an image, you try to see where the blockage is, how much, what kind of stent to use, right? On the right hand side, you already see after the stent is applied. You can also see the nice images reconstructed from the basic CT images. Lung analysis, this has become very popular last year due to COVID. Lung analysis is very common in CT earlier, and we have seen the potential of CT last year. There are a lot of CT examinations that helped in detecting COVID much before the patient even showed the symptoms. As we know, COVID is predominantly affects the respiratory system, right? Respiratory system, lung is the main organ for respiratory system. And some of you can also quantify. You can detect where the nodules, the lesions are, and you can also quantify the size, density of these. See them so small that you cannot visualize them on advanced that can determine even if the lesion is just 1 or 2 pixels thickness. You can see they can pick up and the level of detail that image processing algorithms can distinguish. These are not animated images, these are real images coming out of our applications. Similarly, the vascular structure of the brain, this is using MR. Another example, liver analysis. Liver analysis is typically used in estimating the fat in the liver because there are a lot of conditions, clinical conditions that are associated with the fat in the liver. So here also we can see nice segmentation of the vessels supplying blood to various parts of the liver, and segment the liver into different segments, different regions, and then clearly visualize the changes in the structure and the physiology of the liver. Okay, so those are some examples of application of basic image processing techniques like registration and segmentation and some underlying biochemical processes in quantifying the images. Apart from that, there are non-quantification methodologies that are also used. Simple things like data fusion. I'm not sure if I have the image. Yeah, for example, you have fusion, right? You have a CT image, and if you have an MR image of the same cross section, each providing different information, you can fuse one image on top of the other and only show the good things from each one, right? So there's a multimodality fusion. So you take images of a very good example is CT and PET. CT has the
temples,
structural
festivals,
information
even
and the
Madurai
nuclear
Chitra
PET
festivals
images
and
function.
everything. So
You
we have
put
visited
function on top of
many
structure,
kind of crowd
so you see
places,
both.
and what is
So
happening
we have special
actually?
image processing
Why
techniques to fuse
at that
images,
time how the crowd
and you
crush
also have
has
special
happened,
techniques
and
to use
why
multiparametric
some
analysis. Multiparametric is nothing but you have different images giving different information, different parameters. And to diagnose, you need all of them coming together. And we put images coming from various sources and do analysis of various images together on various parameters and derive quantitative information. And there's also a lot of CAD, the computer-aided detection and diagnosis software algorithms to assist the interpretation of the images. And in the recent, I'm running a little fast because we have a little less time. And recently, there's a lot of explosion of AI, even in medical domain, using machine learning, artificial intelligence, data-driven, big data kind of solutions. A lot of it is used in reconstruction. First, predominantly to reduce acquisition. Right? So you acquire less, use AI to interpret or synthesize signals. And you also use AI in doing a lot of analysis. A lot. And another good example in COVID times is we have deployed a lot of guys, not just Philips, a lot of vendors have deployed AI-based lung detection algorithms. The moment you take an X-ray, there's an AI engine running behind. It tries to detect if it's a positive case or negative case, even before it goes to a radiologist. And of course, it doesn't do diagnosis. It only filters. So out of 100 patients, it filters say 10. So radiologist has to only look at 10 images instead of spending time in looking at 90 images that are for sure not positive, right? So AI is used in a lot of places now. It has a lot of image processing potential in the upcoming technologies. Any questions? I think we are out of time already. Was this full?
Dear participants, any questions?
In our lab itself, any specific restricted lab, we have started implementing all these kind of face recognition systems. So particular specific lab, the database has been entered, and the face is matched, they can enter into that particular lab. So these are all the initial level projects what we have done. Are the real challenges if we have actually whatever I have showcased are very comfortable zone only. So what is the real challenge? So this is one of my MTech student, Kokila. She is one. We have done a project in we have combined in a synaptic video as well as face recognition. But the challenge is this kind of
not have MR CT, but they have systems which do clinical image processing and derive this quantitative information, right? So they are basically advanced image processing systems. They do not acquire the images. So the acquisition guys are different and the processing guys are different.
Gajendra sir, are you?
Yes, sir. That is a terahertz imaging. I'm asking about the TRA, terahertz imaging technique that is emerging nowadays. That is like apart from the CT and MR, I think one more new modality is coming nowadays.
I've not heard of that. Okay, there's a company called TeraRecon. So they have software called TeraVitria. So I was trying to relate to that, but I don't know. Then sorry, I'm not aware of what you're talking.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, sir. Sir, please provide your email ID in the chat box so we can contact you in future.
Yeah, sure.
Excuse me, sir.
I will drop it right now. The email ID. Yes. Yeah. Somebody wanted to ask something?
Madam, please ask your doubt, madam.